Ask 100 Americans how much they need to retire, and most will hand you a number that does not exist. In 2024, Northwestern Mutual asked exactly that question, and the average answer came back at $1.46 million. Charles Schwab ran its own version the same year and landed near $1.8 million. These figures get repeated so often they have hardened into folklore, the supposed price of admission to a dignified old age. Now, set that folklore next to the data. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median American household is worth about $193,000. The line where you enter the wealthiest quarter of the entire country sits near $660,000. So the target the average person believes in, $1.5 million, is roughly 8 times what the typical household actually holds, and comfortably above where the richest quarter of the nation even begins. There are only 2 ways to read that. Either the entire country is doomed, or the target is wrong. It is the second one. And the interesting question is not how the number got so large. It is who benefits from you believing it. Because the real threshold, the point where the mathematics of your money quietly reverses direction, is not $1 million. It is $600,000. And almost nobody tells you that it happens. This is not a magic number. $600,000 will not fund a mansion, and it does not behave identically for everyone. But it is a real, measurable line where 3 things change at once. What your money earns relative to you, how dangerous a market crash actually becomes, and what your own mind starts doing to sabotage both. We are going to take those apart, one problem at a time. Problem 1, the phantom target. Start with where the $1.5 million came from, because it did not fall out of a spreadsheet of your actual expenses. It was reverse engineered from a business model. Most financial advice in this country is sold on a percentage. The industry calls it assets under management, and the standard price is 1% of your portfolio every single year, forever. On $600,000, that 1% is $6,000 a year, quietly extracted whether the market rises or falls. On $1.5 million, the same fee is $15,000. Read that again. The advisor's income is not tied to whether you retire comfortably. It is tied to how large the pile is. The bigger the number you are chasing, the bigger their paycheck for helping you chase it. Now sit in that chair for a moment. A saver walks in at 58 with $600,000 and asks the only question that matters. Do I have enough? As you are about to see, the mathematically honest answer is often yes. But yes, you have enough ends the relationship. No, you need far more, keeps the deposits flowing, keeps the balance climbing, and keeps the fee growing right along with it. This is not a conspiracy, and it is not villainy. Most advisors operate under real fiduciary rules, and most genuinely believe they are helping. The problem is quieter and harder to fix than a villain would be. It is a system in which the honest answer and the profitable answer point in opposite directions, and where nobody has ever been fired for telling a client to be a little more afraid. The evidence is not hidden. The White House Council of Economic Advisors documented these conflicts of interest back in 2015. Research in the Journal of Retirement has since shown how fees calculated on the size of your assets steer advice away from anything that shrinks the pile, including the plain truth that a client could simply stop accumulating and walk away. So when a retirement calculator informs you that you need $1.5 million, ask a colder question. Whose revenue depends on that figure being large? 9 times out of 10, the calculator belongs to a company whose income rises with your balance. The $1 million target is not exactly a lie. It is a marketing department. Problem 2, the silent crossover. Set the myth aside and look at what $600,000 actually does in an ordinary year. The number that governs everything here is 7%. That is the long-run real return of the American stock market. The S&P 500's roughly 10% average annual gain since 1928, minus about 3% for inflation. The real figure is the only one worth using, because the nominal one is a vanity metric. A portfolio can grow 10% on paper, while a third of that growth is eaten by the rising price of everything around it. 7% is what actually lands in your life. Apply 7% to $600,000 and you get $42,000. In a normal year, dividends reinvested, no genius, no lucky stock picks, $42,000 simply appears. Here is the comparison that should stop you cold. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts the median full-time American worker's earnings at just under $60,000 a year before taxes. That is a person showing up 40 hours a week, commuting, sitting through meetings, answering to a manager. Your $600,000 in an average year earns nearly what that person earns without setting an alarm, without requesting time off, without a single performance review. Your money has quietly taken a job of its own, one with no sick days, no resignation letter, and an automatic raise every year. That is the first real change at this number. Not the size of the account, but the relationship between you and the account. For your entire working life, you were the engine. The largest force pushing your net worth forward was your paycheck and your discipline at the end of the month. The portfolio was a passenger, along for the ride. There is a clean way to find the exact moment the passenger takes the wheel. Take the amount you save in a year and multiply it by roughly 14. That is the portfolio size at which a normal market year generates more than your entire annual contribution, because 7% of the balance has grown to equal everything you can add. Run it for real people. A household saving $15,000 a year, genuinely strong by national standards, crosses that line at around $210,000. A disciplined, dual-income household saving $30,000 crosses near $420,000. And a high earner putting away $42,000 a year crosses at almost exactly $600,000. That is why this figure matters. $600,000 is the crossover point for a very strong saver. It is the balance at which even someone doing nearly everything right can no longer outsave their own portfolio. Below that line, your savings rate is the entire story. Skip a month and it costs you. Optimize it and it pays you. Above it, the link snaps. Your contribution becomes a rounding error against what the balance does on its own. The variable that decided your outcome for 20 years simply stops deciding it. What decides it now is the market, and far more importantly, what you do in response. Problem 3. The sequence trap. The same mathematics that makes the gains larger makes the losses feel lethal, and it hides a danger most people have never heard named. Since 1928, the American stock market has passed through more than 24 bear markets, declines of 20% or more, with the average one falling about 35% from top to bottom. They arrive every 4 to 6 years or so, which means that across a 30-year retirement, you should expect somewhere between 5 and 8 of them, not as a risk, as a schedule. Now watch your brain betray you. A 35% decline is a percentage, abstract, bloodless, easy to shrug off. But nobody feels percentages. People feel dollars. Run the same crash on 2 portfolios. $100,000 falls to $65,000. Unpleasant, survivable. $600,000 falls to $390,000. Identical percentage, identical crash, but the second person just watched $210,000 evaporate. That is more than many Americans earn in 4 years, gone on a screen in an afternoon. And that very physical feeling is what makes a person who did everything right for 2 decades do something catastrophic in a single sitting. Sell everything, flee to cash, and wait for a calm the market never announces. But the crash itself is not the real threat. The real threat has a name: sequence of returns risk. Here is how it works. Suppose you retire, and in your very first year, the market falls 20%. Your $600,000 is now $480,000. Markets recover, you know the history, but you still have to eat. So you withdraw your planned $24,000. Look closely at what just happened. You did not withdraw 4%. You pulled $24,000 from a $480,000 base, an effective rate of 5%, out of a portfolio that now has to climb back with fewer shares inside it. The shares you sold at the bottom are simply not there for the recovery. Do that 2 or 3 times in the first 5 years of retirement, and you can go broke even in a scenario where the average annual return was perfectly respectable. The average does not save you. The order of the returns does. The cruelty of the design is almost elegant. The moment in your life when you hold the most money you have ever had, and therefore have the most to lose, is the exact moment your income depends on that money, and your nerve is at its thinnest. The fix, mercifully, is boring. You hold a cash buffer, 1 to 2 years of planned withdrawals, somewhere around $24,000 to $48,000 sitting outside the market. When a downturn hits, you spend the cash and leave the portfolio untouched. You never sell a single share at the bottom because you never have to. Holding that much cash earning almost nothing feels wasteful. It is not an investment. It is insurance against your own worst instinct. Which brings us to the question underneath all of it. How much does this portfolio actually need to pay you? Start with the rule everyone quotes and almost no one has read. In 1994, a financial advisor named William Bengen took every stretch of market history from 1926 onward, the Depression, the stagflation of the 70s, every war and every crash, and asked one brutal question. What withdrawal rate would have survived every single 30-year retirement in that entire record? The answer was 4%. Withdraw 4% of your starting balance in year one, adjust it for inflation after that, and historically the money lasted the full 30 years every time. On $600,000, that is $24,000 a year indexed to inflation with a century of history behind it. The research did not freeze in 1990. Recent analysis from Morningstar has nudged the sustainable rate to just under 4%, and the reason is unglamorous. Bond yields recovered. With the 10-year Treasury yielding around 4% again, the boring half of the portfolio finally pulls its weight. But be honest about the limits. 4% was engineered for a 30-year retirement. Quit at 65, plan to 95. Stretch the horizon to 40 or 50 years for an early retirement, and the honest rate drops toward 3.3%. Anyone selling you 4% works forever is selling you a timeline that was never in the data. And here's the piece the million-dollar myth conveniently forgets. You are not retiring on the portfolio alone. There is a second income stream, inflation-adjusted, government-backed, and lasting exactly as long as you do. The Social Security Administration puts the average retired worker's benefit at roughly $2,000 a month, about $24,000 a year. Stack them. Portfolio withdrawal plus Social Security gives a single retiree with $600,000 a combined income near $48,000 a year for life, both streams rising with inflation. For a married couple, two benefits stack and push the household past $60,000. That is not a desperation budget. That is a funded retirement. Not lavish, not a private jet, but mathematically, historically, boringly covered. Problem 4. The enemy in the mirror. If the math works at $600,000 for an ordinary person, and the industry has a financial reason to tell you it doesn't, there is still one adversary left, and it is not the market. It is you. Start with a finding that should genuinely unsettle you. In 2025, researchers David Blanchett and Michael Finke published a study in the Financial Planning Review examining what retirees actually do, not what the models prescribe, but what real people withdraw. Retirees with $100,000 or more pull, on average, around 2% a year. That is roughly half of what the 4% rule permits. Real people with real money systematically underspend every projection the industry builds for them. The fear machinery warns that you will burn through your savings. The data says the opposite risk is the common one, that you will die with far more than you retired on, having denied yourself a decade of living for a danger that never arrived. Why does that happen? Because at $600,000 for the first time, the balance finally looks like real money. And for once, that feeling is accurate. You are holding nearly triple what the median household has. The Federal Reserve puts the median net worth of Americans aged 55 to 64, the peak earning, peak saving stretch of anyone's life, at about $364,000. You are ahead of that by more than half. Against your age group, against the country, against almost any honest yardstick, you are objectively, verifiably ahead. And that sensation, this is finally serious money, is precisely the trigger. Because a feeling has no idea how compounding works. This particular feeling produces two mistakes that are mirror images of one another, and both arrive dressed as wisdom. The first is panic-proofing. You look at the balance, and a quiet voice says, "We cannot afford to lose this now." It sounds like maturity. So you begin shifting money out of stocks and into the safe things, bonds, cash, anything earning around 3%, because watching $200,000 swing in a bad year is more than your stomach agreed to. Now price that caution. Take a 50-year-old with $600,000. Left invested at 7%, that balance grows to roughly $1.66 million by age 65. Moved into 3% assets instead, it reaches about $935,000. The difference is around $720,000. That is the price of never having to feel afraid, paid by selling the single most productive stretch of compounding your money we'll ever see. At the exact moment, the balance finally grew large enough for compounding to matter. The second mistake is the opposite temperament with the same root. Call it coasting. The balance feels safe, so you exhale. The savings rate that built the portfolio starts to soften. A nicer car here, a renovation there, contributions quietly shrinking because look at the balance. Surely the hard part is done. Except the hard part was not done. It was about to begin. The years right after 600,000 are the years the compounding curve bends upward hardest, where a single year of growth can outweigh several years of your old contributions. Easing off now is training for a marathon and then strolling the final mile because the finish line is in view. Notice what both errors share. In one, fear takes the wheel. In the other, comfort does. In both, the balance became real, the feeling took over, and the arithmetic was demoted to an advisor nobody listens to. 2 decades of discipline can be undone, not by a crash or a bad investment, but by a feeling that happened to have access to the sell button. So here is what this threshold actually demands, and it is the reverse of everything that got you here. Every year before this line rewarded effort. Save more, earn more, and the needle moved. That trained you to believe progress comes from action. But above the line, a 20% gain adds $120,000, 10 years of hard saving delivered by a year in which you did nothing at all. Your effort has become statistically irrelevant to the outcome. The only lever still connected to anything is restraint. Holding through a decline, logging in, seeing the damage, and closing the tab is now the highest value action available to you. It produces nothing visible, it feels like negligence, and it out-earns a year of overtime. The person who builds $600,000 and the person who keeps it are not the same person. Building it took aggression, earning, optimizing, pushing. Keeping it takes patience, stillness, and a near total refusal to be helpful. Most people never make that trade. They keep attacking a problem that now asks them to stand perfectly still, and the portfolio pays for the confusion. So, the real test at $600,000 is not what you do next. It is what you refuse to do, year after year, while everyone around you confuses activity with achievement. The $1 million target was never a measurement of your life. It was a measurement of someone else's revenue. Learn to see the difference, because understanding money is your best defense.